So today we are going to look at Ronaldo's World Cup journey, Cristiano Ronaldo's journey throughout the entire World Cup, his history at every single World Cup that he's played up until this point. And then we're going to compare and contrast and see how Ronaldo himself is shaping up for the 2026 World Cup, as well as Portugal overall. And I'm going to talk about how the team is built around Ronaldo, what form he's in, how he is heading into this World Cup, and then, of course, how far I think Portugal will go in the build-up to their opening game here at 2026. So, without further ado, we can start all the way at the beginning. And Ronaldo's first appearance for Portugal, his first tournament appearance for Portugal, was actually at Euro 2004, in which Portugal hosted. And this was a momentous tournament for him. This is the first time he was seen on the world stage for the most part. And Portugal had a very good team. This is the famous tournament where they went all the way to the final, but then shockingly lost to Greece, leaving a young Cristiano in tears. Overall, he had a very good performance there, but he was still a very young player. He was a cog in the machine. He wasn't the star of the team yet. And that same kind of dynamic carried into the 2006 World Cup, where Portugal actually did very well. This was a star-studded Portugal team. This is, you would say, probably their second golden generation, in the midst of their second golden generation. And as I mentioned, Ronaldo was a young and upcoming player. At this point, he had left Sporting Lisbon. He was at Manchester United. He was ushering himself in as one of the best players in the Premier League, one of the best players in the world. But for Portugal, he still was competing for with a bunch of other stars. I mean, you still had Luis Figo, you still had Rui Costa, Deco. Ronaldo didn't even wear the number 7 shirt yet. He famously wore the number 17. And at this World Cup, Portugal was very solid under the Brazilian manager, Filipão. They're very strong defensively. They had a tough route all the way to the semifinals, where they unfortunately lost to France, and then they eventually lost the third place playoff to Germany. But with the exception of the 1966 World Cup, that was Portugal's best World Cup performance to date, and then that still is their best performance to date. Ronaldo himself had a very good tournament. He scored a goal against Iran there, and like I mentioned, it was a good performance, but he didn't really take control over the World Cup. But there was no expectation for him to do so, because he was not the star of the team, like I mentioned. In between this World Cup and the next World Cup is where you really start to see a transition. On Ronaldo's end, this is when he becomes the best player in the world. He wins the 2008 Ballon d'Or, wins the Champions League with Manchester United, wins a bunch of Premier Leagues with Manchester United. Eventually in 2009, then he moves to Real Madrid. But then also in Portugal, you start to see the guys like Figo, Deco, Costa. They all retire and they leave, leaving Ronaldo as the central point of the team, not just the focal point of the attack, but just the overall star of the team. At Euro 2008, Portugal did okay. It wasn't a great performance. It wasn't a particularly spectacular performance from Ronaldo either. They got narrowly eliminated by Germany in the quarterfinals. But by the 2010 World Cup, Ronaldo's coming into this off a great season, his first season with Real Madrid, and Carlos Queiroz is the manager of Portugal. And the way that he set up this team, it's a very defensively sound, defense-first, pragmatic style of play, which honestly speaking, a lot of Portuguese managers in the past have tried to employ that style to varying degrees of success, of course. This is the beginning of where you start to see the Portuguese team, I think, just the general player quality start to decline a little bit. And on the flip side, Ronaldo's ability skyrockets. It's a very unfortunate. So, as Ronaldo's getting better, the team starts to decline. Like I said, there's not much more of the golden generation from the 2002 World Cup, Euro 2004, World Cup 2006, but it's still a solid squad. And Portugal are drawn into a very tough group in World Cup 2010. They are with Brazil, Ivory Coast, and North Korea, and they sneak through the group stage there. And then they go up against Spain, of all teams, in the round of 16. They're Iberian neighbors, and it's a very close game, but Portugal end up losing 1-0. And there's no shame in losing to the world champions. There is some debate over whether the goal that Spain scored was offside. Obviously, this is the era before VAR, all that stuff. But still, I think Spain was probably the better team on the day, and obviously they were the better team throughout the tournament. Ronaldo himself didn't really have that great of a performance. He only scored 1 goal this tournament, which was 1 goal, albeit a nice goal, against North Korea. But I think that's not necessarily due to Ronaldo himself. It's more so with the style that Queiroz plays, where it's just a very defense-first mentality. Leading into the period between this World Cup and the next World Cup, though, you really start to see the decline of the Portuguese squad. At this point, the most talented forwards in this Portuguese team are Ronaldo and Nani, who's starting to decline a little bit, and then guys like Elder Postiga and Hugo Almeida, who, those two guys aren't terrible players, but it's a far cry from Figo and Deco and Costa, that generation. It's also a far cry from what we have now, the Portuguese team now. So, but that being said, at Euro 2012, Portugal actually do surprisingly well, which I think papers over a lot of the cracks, the issues with this team. Ronaldo himself has a very solid performance as Portugal get to the semifinals, where they lose to Spain again, this time on penalties. Again, no shame in losing to the Spanish dynasty team. This is the team that ended up winning this tournament as well. But then you start to see, I think you start to see some cracks appearing in this team, especially where they almost didn't qualify for the 2014 World Cup. They had to go through. Ronaldo had to save them with that famous hat trick against Sweden in the playoff. And at this point, though, because of how good Portugal is, or how the perception of how Portugal was, there's a heavy expectation on them at this World Cup, and they're drawn into one of the groups of death alongside Germany, the United States, and Ghana. Another reason why the expectations were so high is Ronaldo was coming off of, in my opinion, his best ever season. I mean, there's a huge debate over what is Ronaldo's best ever season, but 2013-14 season, he scored an insane amount of goals throughout the entirety of all competitions. He scored 17 goals in the Champions League as Real Madrid finally won La Decima, and he was the key figure to that. He ends up winning the Ballon d'Or that year as well. He does pick up a knee injury, though, that does affect his performance towards the tail end of the season for Real Madrid, and then also for the World Cup. And when you combine all these things, when you combine the fact that Germany's drawn into this, Portugal's drawn into this very tough group in their opening games against Germany, the fact that Ronaldo has this, slight knee injury, and then also the fact that this Portuguese team is just, in my opinion, wasn't very good. I think all those problems got exposed right there. In the opening game of the tournament, Portugal gets obliterated 4-0 by Germany. They tied the United States, but I think the United States was the better team. And if it wasn't for, a few silly defensive mistakes, they would have won. And then Portugal did beat Ghana, but it wasn't enough to put them through to the knockout rounds, and they get eliminated there. Overall, Ronaldo did not have a very good performance. He only scored 1 goal, and it was a tap-in against Ghana there. He did have a few moments here and there, like he saved Portugal against the United States. His cross that Varela scored is what tied the game 2-2 in like the 95th minute or something like that. But overall, not a great performance. But at the same time, it's not so much on him. I mean, he had a knee injury, like I said, and also Portugal overall is just very dysfunctional this tournament. Heading into the period in between these two World Cups, though, Fernando Santos comes in, and there's just very low expectations for Portugal overall, which again is super ironic considering how good Ronaldo is. This is, the start of three-peat for Real Madrid. He wins even more Ballon d'Ors. This is some of his best ever performances ever on a football pitch. But Portugal's squad continues to decline even more. And then we see at Euro 2016, there is zero expectations. But football is a really silly game, and sometimes things defy logic. And Portugal end up winning Euro 2016 with Fernando Santos just puts together this defensive juggernaut of a team that performs solid enough in each games, and with just a little bit of luck, and also a good performance from both Ronaldo, Nani, Pepe, guys like that, and the winning goal from Eder in the final, they end up winning the tournament, beating France in France, Portugal's first ever international trophy. And I think it does, this is a momentous achievement for Portugal, for Ronaldo. It basically contributed to him winning I think it was the defining factor to him winning the Ballon d'Or in 2016 as well. But it does set an expectation for Portugal now as one of the best teams in the world. And I think that is a status that they have struggled with ever since then. Heading into World Cup 2018, Ronaldo's last season with Real Madrid, wins the Champions League yet again, has a really good performance overall that year. Portugal, though, are going in a bit of a transition period. So Fernando Santos obviously is still the manager, and he's still trying to employ this very pragmatic defensive style, but you start to see a transition away from a lot of those more defensive players, and then you start to see an injection of attacking talent. You start to see Bernardo Silva break into the team. You also see Bruno Fernandes, not yet João Felix, but he will come the next year, for example. Guys like that, Gonçalo Guedes. And Portugal don't have the best performance at World Cup 2018 because they have these, it feels like you have two competing identities within the team. There's a wealth of attacking options, but then the coach is trying to play this defensive style. And not to mention, the World Cup is going to have much higher expectations than, the Euros or even the Confederations Cup that they played the year before, in which Portugal got third place. But Ronaldo himself has a fantastic performance. Portugal's drawn into a very tough group alongside Spain, Morocco, and Iran. Ronaldo scores a hat trick on the opening day, saves Portugal from a loss against Spain. He scores a diving header against Morocco, and then overall just was very solid throughout the tournament. But Portugal, like I said, just these issues here, not to mention just how how much more harder it is to play at the World Cup. They end up going out in the round of 16 to Uruguay. Overall, kind of a disappointing performance from Portugal, in my opinion, but Ronaldo in particular had a fantastic tournament. Then, though, you do see at the Nations League next year, Portugal do win the Nations League, and Ronaldo himself has a great performance. Portugal overall is very good, which I think sets another unfair expectation leading into both Euro 2020 and World Cup 2022, where at Euro 2020, by this point, Ronaldo is at Juventus. He's starting to, you can see that he's visibly getting older, but he's still one of the best strikers in the world. He's still scoring a whole bunch of goals. But at the Euros, I think you start to see the Santos system really fall apart. Portugal's squad is super talented by this point. This is no longer Euro 2016 where you have to call Eder off the bench. At this point, you have Ruben Dias, you still have Pepe, you have João Cancelo, Rafael Guerreiro. That's just a back line there. But then the midfield is stacked. The front line is also stacked. And Portugal, again, drawn into a tough group, which Portugal is very unlucky getting drawn into tough groups here. They just don't play well, though. They beat Hungary. I think they got a little lucky in that game. And then they got comprehensively beat by Germany in the next game. And then, ironically, their best game of the group stage is against France, but even still, that ends up as a 2-2 tie. And then in the round of 16, they get eliminated by Belgium in a game that really could have gone either way, but still. Overall disappointing performance from Portugal. Ronaldo in particular, though, funnily enough, had a great performance. He ended up scoring 5 goals this tournament. Granted, a lot of them were penalties, but still, he was a constant threat the entirety of this tournament. He ends up as a joint top scorer, which is crazy given his age. But then you see Ronaldo's career start to really change after this tournament, in my opinion. So this summer, 2021, he goes back to Manchester United. His first season there, it's not perfect, but overall, he plays very well, despite his age and despite how dysfunctional Manchester United ends up becoming that season. He still has a very good season overall, though, but it's the next year, right before the 2022 World Cup, where things start to fall apart, in my opinion. I mean, there's a family tragedy that he has, but then he also has, just disagreements with Erik ten Hag, the manager of Manchester United there, and then it just ruins his confidence. He ends up forcing his way out of Manchester United in a very spectacular way with the media involved and everything. And I think it just completely ruined all the momentum that Ronaldo had. And you can just visibly see on the pitch he wasn't the same player. It's very sad. This was Ronaldo's worst season up until this point. And unfortunately, that carried into the 2022 World Cup. Obviously, he's going to be going with the squad. Obviously, he's going to be starting because he's Ronaldo. But overall, he just did not have a very good performance. Portugal was in a group with Uruguay, Ghana, and South Korea. And Ronaldo does score. He does break a record for scoring in all these consecutive World Cups here. He scores a penalty against Ghana. But other than that, he didn't really have any positive moments. I mean, I wouldn't say it was an awful performance by any means. He was always a constant threat, but he just looked a step behind. His reflexes weren't the same. His touches weren't as sharp. His shots he wasn't able to get a shot off as quickly, things like that. And then Portugal, same thing with Euro 2020. It's just these, and honestly, World Cup 2018, you see these competing ideologies where Fernando Santos wants to play this defensive style. He wants to prioritize defense, but almost all the attack, or almost all the talent in this team, it leans more towards the attack. And overall, it's just not the best performance. They end up getting out of the group. They smash Switzerland in the round of 16, which makes it look like, there's something to be reckoned with, that they're a force to be reckoned with, despite the fact that Ronaldo got benched in that game for Gonzalo Ramos, who ends up scoring a hat-trick there. But then they fall short against Morocco. The fairy tale run from Morocco there. At this point, Santos leaves, and Roberto Martinez comes in, who I'm not a fan of at all. I think that, I was not a fan of this decision when it was announced. This is the guy that I think wasted the Belgium golden generation, and now we're in the midst of a second Portuguese, or arguably a third Portuguese gold generation, and it's like, you're going to waste this generation on this guy as well. And we saw that plain as day at Euro 2024, where Portugal went into the tournament with a fantastic squad, but they just looked tactically inept. They were drawn into a group alongside the Czech Republic, Turkey, and Georgia. They played great, or they played okay in the first game. They ended up having to come from behind to beat Czechia. They obliterated Turkey, and then every game after that, they kind of fell short. It felt like every team that they went up that they went up against that had some sort of tactical awareness. Portugal was just devoid of ideas, and then they ended up losing in the quarterfinals against France. Again, it wasn't a terrible performance there. No shame in losing to France, but still, you still felt that Portugal could be doing so much more. And the thing with Ronaldo at this point, he's playing in Saudi, and he's doing good in the Saudi league, but you do have to just acknowledge the reality that the Saudi league is at a much lower quality than what he was previously playing at Europe. And then also, not to mention, he's getting up there in age. He's reaching his late 30s. His performance at Euro 2024 was not very good. He missed a penalty against Slovenia in the round of 16. He had a good performance in the opening two games against Czechia and against Turkey. He famously could have scored against Turkey, but then decided to lay the ball off to Fernandes, who was in a much better position. So you see this where Ronaldo's still an integral part of the team. He's still very important to the team, but he's just not the same anymore. And there was a fear that was going to be Ronaldo's last ever tournament. There was a fear that he would never be at the same level as he was for Portugal again. But I feel like that was, that fear was defied at the Nations League last year in 2025, where Portugal ended up going all the way. They defeated Spain on penalties in the final. And one of the most refreshing things to see was how good Ronaldo was both of these games. I mean, he scored against Germany in the semifinals and scored in the final with a really nice volley to tie the match up, which eventually led the game to go to penalties. And it was just very refreshing. It was also refreshing to see how Portugal played overall. They looked like they were finally leaning on their attacking talent that they had, which now leads to what we have now leading into the 2026 World Cup. Ronaldo in particular is coming off of a very good season. Again, albeit in the Saudi League, but still he's coming off a very good season. He finally won his first major trophy. Finally won the Saudi Pro League, his first major trophy with Al Nassr. And he scored a ton of goals. I believe he was the second top scorer in the Saudi League. And Portugal in particular, if you just look at them on paper, you can make an argument that they are the best team in the world. And in fact, I would say midfield-wise, they are without a doubt the best team in the world, just in terms of the midfield. João Neves, Vitinha just came off back-to-back Champions League wins, and then Bruno Fernandes, who is, despite the fact that United had a very up-and-down season, best player in the Premier League in my eyes. And then the whole rest of the team is very talented, whether it be Nuno Mendes or João Cancelo, or someone like Bernardo Silva, even João Felix, who's playing with Ronaldo and Al Nassr, also had a monstrous season. So Portugal seems to be in a pretty good spot. Ronaldo seems to be in a pretty good spot. The friendly results have been promising, I would say, like the games leading up to this tournament, for Portugal at least. For Ronaldo, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. I thought he played really good against Portugal, I thought he played really good in Portugal's game against Chile, but then in his other game, he against Nigeria, he did miss a few shots there. But it remains to be seen, with the pressure of the World Cup, the heightened pressure, what version of Ronaldo will show up. I mean, I'm a football fan that likes the narratives, that likes the the storybook endings, things like that. And I am inclined to believe that Ronaldo will have a good World Cup. Most likely going to be his last. Never say never, but at this point he's 41, and you do have the feeling that it's now or never for Ronaldo. You also get a feeling of bittersweet sadness, where you're like, imagine if, like, say 2017 Ronaldo was on this team. They would be locked on as champions for the World Cup. Portugal's drawn into a group against Uzbekistan, Congo, and Colombia. Colombia is going to be a tough opponent, but I do think, just considering how inconsistent Colombia can be, I do think Portugal will top the group. The thing is, though, if they top the group, and if Argentina top the group, and they make it through all their the next rounds, they will meet in the quarterfinals, meaning we will see a Messi versus Ronaldo quarterfinal at the World Cup, which is insane. I think if Portugal have enough to overcome Argentina in that game, if they have the tactical awareness, if they have the mental fortitude mainly to overcome Argentina, to come over that mental hurdle, that obstacle there, who knows from there? We could be talking about Portugal potentially winning the World Cup. But it completely rests on that game. If they can't, then I think that's the end of the road for Portugal quarterfinals here. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think. How do you think Portugal's going to perform at this World Cup? How do you think Ronaldo is going to perform at this World Cup? Is this his last? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this video with a friend. Follow the Football Bloc on social media. Follow my live streams as well. But anyway, guys, my name is Brandon, and I will see you later.